All right. I want to talk about testing. The more I've done software development, the more I do software architecture, the more I really love testing. I lean on testing. I can't imagine a world without testing. I feel like we should treat testing as fundamental. All too often, I think testing is treated as an afterthought to software development, like it's an optional add-on. What if instead we were to start thinking of testing as foundational more than development or requirements analysis? And I think that alone would be a bit of a tough pill to swallow. It definitely requires a different way of looking at things. When I say testing, I'm not just talking about writing unit tests or ensuring code coverage. I'm talking about the myriad of test types that should be defined and executed and ideally automated along all the boundaries of a system, the classes, the components, the application, the subsystems, and the solutions, and the building. Test-driven development came along and it revolutionized how we look at software development. It calls for us to develop unit tests before we develop a single line of code. What it really does is it drives accountability. Developers must only write the minimal amount of code necessary to meet the requirements. In a way, tests act as the glue that binds requirements analysis to development and brings them together. What if we were to apply TDD to all types of testing along all types of boundaries? Like we know about red green refactor at the class level, but what if we were able to take that mentality, that approach at the application level and the solution level? I think defining test cases should be considered an essential part of requirements analysis. We should re- we sh- we should consider any requirement to be incomplete if we can't articulate how to test it. And I know that can feel like a lot of work at the beginning of a project, but there's a big payoff. If we can't articulate the test case, then we'll be unable to anticipate the outcome of the requirement. Test cases enable us to validate the quality of our requirements. A tester should be invited to every single requirements analysis meeting. And as each requirement is reviewed, they should be asking, how can I test this? Some requirements, as written, are not testable. For example, we sometimes jump the gun and prescribe a technical approach before we can actually articulate how it provides value to the customer, and that's not testable. During requirements analysis, architects articulate the non-functional requirements. So we go, hey, this has to be secure, it has to be scalable, it has to be performant. These are the quality attributes or non-functional requirements of a system. And a lot of times those requirements can seem too vague. For example, we'll say the system must be secure. And the tester should start a conversation saying, okay, how can I verify that the system is secure? And this will lead to better testable requirements. And it is a group effort between the person writing the requirements and the architect and the tester. And it's a collaborative circle. One strategy for validating requirements is to draw a use case diagram. That's a favorite of mine. I'm a very visual person. We should be able to represent every requirement as a use case, and each use case should be shown to provide value to an actor, the customer. It's along the association line that connects the actor to the use case. That line is very special because it shows how value can be returned to an actor. It's also where we should be able to articulate a use case so that or a test case so we can write a test to verify that use case provides value. Now, I'm going to kind of increase the scope of this. Tests enable adaptability and portability and, more importantly, risk taking. When we define a system's tests prior to implementation or the design, we enable our architects and developers to make decisions more rapidly, especially if you're working in an agile environment. You might have analysis paralysis, but comprehensive tests verify that any technical approach must meet a system's functional and non-functional requirements. That means you make a quick decision, even the worst choice is still going to be a good, acceptable choice. Therefore, if the system's designers change their minds later on during the development lifecycle, they can do it with confidence. It reduces risk. later on in the SDLC, you can say, I don't like what I decided last week. I'm going to do something different. If you have tests there, you can yoink out the old decision and put in a new thing. The tests are still going to pass. And this is going to sound really controversial, scandalous. Testing is necessary even when development is not. Sometimes when you're considering the technical approach for a solution, we think about buying something rather than building it. And we might be tempted to think that testing isn't necessary. After all, testing a third-party component should be considered the vendor's responsibility, right? I mean, that's what we're paying for. And they probably did test along the boundaries of the system they're giving us, but we still got to verify that this purchased component, it meets our requirements. And while we may not be writing unit tests along those boundaries of the compiled code, we still got to create and execute tests along the boundary of that third-party component to make sure it meets our requirements. And if we're willing to change our requirements to reverse fit it to this purchased piece of code, maybe we didn't really need the software in the first place. And maybe we didn't really understand what value we're trying to provide to the customer. So we got to be careful about how willing we are to shove that square peg into a round hole. What I'm saying is, even with no code solutions, we got to test our solutions. We got to test. A tester is important, even if there's no code. And finally, it's been said before, but I'm going to say it again. Testing must be automated, really. If testing is to be considered foundational to development and delivery of these solutions, and if tests are to be applied to all the boundaries of all the solutions, then you're probably thinking, man, that's a lot of tests. And you'd be right, because more testing is a trade-off. It compensates for hurried requirements analysis. It compensates for a lack of comprehensive design. It allows us to fail fast and iterate. So how are we going to ever manage to rapidly execute all those tests at every boundary for every iteration? And the answer is automation. We can't afford to spend 3 months out of the year manually performing regression tests. We can't afford human error when we need that precision. And we can't afford to skip that less trivial testing for the more important things, because if we defined it as a requirement, it's all important. So anyway, that's my little speechifying for testing. What do you think? You don't have to totally agree with this, but I am hoping to change the way we look at testing. So